My name is Dan Vera, and I'd like to welcome you to this episode of Fish for Fallen Light, a semi-regular poetry podcast in which I speak to poet and writer friends about their favorite poems. This is actually our second episode. I really appreciate those who watched the first one. If you haven't had the opportunity yet, that included a conversation with two poets, Sheila Black and David Campos, in which we talked about their favorite poems, a poem by John Keats and a poem by Louise Gluck, respectively. Anyway, those are all online, both on YouTube and on Facebook as well. So check it out if you haven't had an opportunity, and spread the word. This project, this experimental project, came out of a desire to create something that could be of use to folks during the um, coronavirus pandemic and the lockdown. Not sure if you can hear the birds twittering outside my window. I'm broadcasting from Washington, D.C., where it is a pretty spectacularly beautiful spring day. Unfortunately, that's outside, and we're indoors doing this, sharing some poetry. Today's episode includes an interview that I did a couple of days back with a wonderful poet and educator named Lupe Mendez. Lupe is the author of a brand new book of poetry, an award-winning book of poetry, as we will talk about, Why I Am Like Tequila. He chose a really wonderful poem by Natalie Diaz. I really sort of appreciated not only his reading of that poem, but also sharing his insights. With no further ado, I guess we'll go to Lupe. Hi, Lupe. How you doing?
Hey, Dan. Pretty good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. You are. How are things in Houston?
Um, we're making it. The schools have closed, businesses have closed. But that's it's part of the game.
Yeah, it's
So
happening
far so
everywhere,
good.
isn't it? Yeah, thick times. Let's see. For those, I don't know how many people are going to tune into this. I'm just going to put it on YouTube and we'll see what happens. But
Right.
for those people watching this, you are we are both Canta Mundo and Macondo Fellows.
Yep.
You are the co-founder of the Libro Traficante movement, poet, educator, activist. You founded the Tintero Projects,
Yep.
which works with writers of color in the Texas Gulf Coast region. Your work's been published in Kenyon Review, Norton Sudden Fictional Latino, Huizache, Luna Luna, Ostrich, Tinderbox, Pilgrimage, very good places. Texas Review, Border Census, todos. Los Angeles Review of Books, newest channel, Voluble, and Gulf Coast, among others. You got a new book out,
Yes. Why I am like tequila.
Why I Am Like
The,
Tequila, and which just recently won.
yeah, it just
Little
won
woo woo.
the Texas Institute of Letters. What's it called? The Robertson, I think John A. Robertson Prize for Best First Book of Poetry. I have to say it
Sweet.
real slow or I'll mess it up.
Yeah,
But yeah, so I just found out in like at the beginning of March. So
March, right. And
yeah,
you were here in DC in February, right? I mean, not that long.
yeah. I like literally, I think I came back like a week later and
Yeah.
got the phone call from Carmen Tafoya,
Wow.
and so yeah,
That's fantastic. Congratulations.
thank you.
Um, so thanks for agreeing to do this. This was,
Yeah,
so many of us, more of us, are sort of homebound, and I thought, this was sort of a good opportunity to basically talk about poems that we love and that kind of live with us over time. And so I'm calling this "Fish for Fallen Light," which is it's actually a line from one of my favorite, probably my favorite poem.
oh
Uh,
sweet.
yeah, it's a poem by Pablo Neruda, one of the last ones that he wrote. Um,
Oh,
and it "Fish for Fallen Light with patience" is the closing line. Well, closing line. So anyway, you have a great poem by Natalie Diaz that
Yeah.
you wanted to talk about. So tell me about it.
So no more cake here. Like I've had the opportunity to sit and have conversations with Natalie, as well as a chance to see her as both a keynote and then work with her in separate two occasions for writing workshops. This my last Canto Mundo retreat. She was one of the visiting workshop leads, so I was able to work with her there. When Lorian Guerrero was still in charge of Macondo, a little bit after Macondo was done, Natalie Diaz came down and did a quick workshop with like 8 of us that
Nice.
were able to sit in. And so Jasmine, we drove up to San Antonio and then did a workshop with her there. And then having been a part of the poetry incubator put on by Crescendo Literary and the Poetry Foundation in Chicago, she was also a guest speaker and had a really great, insightful conversation about what empathy really means, and whether or not it's a selfish thing or if it's what it really is supposed to mean based in language. And so we had really great conversations from there. So the poem, No More Cake Here, is devastatingly a beautiful piece, functioning in terms of talking about family and the hardships of addiction and dysfunction in ways that were both beautiful, but then also like heavy. But it's layered in this very surreal breakdown that for me was just I kept coming back to it over and over because it's such a great piece. It's a longer poem, but there's ways that in which the speaker in the poem is relating the idea of preparing for a kind of party, but also talking about death, the way we look at how we celebrate and mourn, but then also in dealing with addiction, what happens when a person who can't function for themselves has to take a back seat because you have to make different choices in order to get your own life in check, especially if that person is causing some kind of consternation. And so I think it beautifully captures all of those elements within the poem itself. And so I kind of ran into it just a little bit after having purchased her book, her first collection, when my brother was an Aztec a few years ago. And then like I ran into it on the Poetry Foundation's website and just it's stuck with me. I've taught with it before. Actually, most recently did a half-day workshop with teachers to talk about how you can describe and characterize a moment or a person, but not actually speak directly on that individual, and using language to echo out what that can look like.
So you've really worked with it. It's kind of lived with you. Yeah.
So
do you think I've been asking people how your relationship with the poem might have changed over time. I mean, if you read it differently, or does it change? Does your relationship with the poem change over time, or does it
I think
change
it
you over
can.
time?
I think because for me this piece is a little fresher. I view it in two ways. So there are things that speak to me in terms of what it's like to grow up in a dysfunctional household with a person who's addicted to a substance. But then reading it from another vantage point of a person who's had to make the choice to step away from a certain situation, and with those eyes as well. So as I get older, it's probably going to make some twists and turns in terms of like how I read it over the years.
Do you want to read it for us?
Yeah.
Or, yeah.
So here goes. No More Cake Here by Natalie Diaz. When my brother died, I worried there wasn't enough time to deliver the 100 invitations I'd scribbled while on the phone with the mortuary. Because of the short notice, no need to RSVP. Unfortunately, the firemen couldn't come. I had hoped they'd give free rides on the truck. They did agree to drive by the house once with the lights on. It was a party after all. I put mom and dad in charge of balloons, let them blow as many years of my brother's name, jails, $20 bills, midnight phone calls, fistfights, and ER visits as they could let go of. The scarlet balloons zigzagged along the ceiling like they'd been filled with helium. Mom blew up so many that she fell asleep. She slept for 10 years. She missed the whole party. My brothers and sisters were giddy, shredding his stained t-shirts and raggedy pants, throwing them up in the air like confetti. When the clowns came in, a few balloons slipped out the front door. They seemed to know where they were going and shrank to a fistful of red grins at the end of our cul-de-sac. The clowns played toy bugles until the air was scented with rotten raspberries. They pulled scarves from Mom's ear. She slept through it. I baked my brother's favorite cake, chocolate, white frosting. When I counted, there were 99 of us in the kitchen. We all stuck our fingers in the mixing bowl. A few stray dogs came to the window. I heard their stomachs and mouths growling over the mariachi band playing in the bathroom. There was no room in the hallway because of the magician. The mariachis complained about the bathtub acoustics. I told the dogs, no more cake here, and shut the window. The fire truck came by with the sirens on. The dogs ran away. I sliced the cake into 99 pieces. I wrapped all the electronic equipment in the house, taped pink bows and glittery ribbons to them, remote controls, the Polaroid, stereo, shop vac, even the motor to Dad's work truck, everything my brother had taken apart and put back together doing his crystal meth tricks. He'd always been a magician of sorts. Two mutants came to the door. One looked almost human. They wanted to know if my brother had willed them the pots and pans and spoons stacked in his basement bedroom. They said they missed my brother's cooking. And did we have any cake? No more cake here, I told them. Well, what's in the piñata, they asked. I told them God was what they ran into the desert, barefoot. I gave Dad his slice and put Mom's in the freezer.
Mm.
I gave Dad his slice and put Mom's in the freezer. I bought up the pots and pans and spoons. Really, my brother was a horrible cook. Banged them together like a New Year's Day celebration. My brother finally showed up and showed up asking why he hadn't been invited and who baked the cake. He told me I shouldn't smile, that this whole party was shit because I'd imagined it all. The worst part, he said, was he was still alive. The worst part, he said, was he wasn't even dead. I think he's right. But maybe the worst part is that I'm still imagining the party. Maybe the worst part is that I still taste the cake.
Hmm.
And so, like, all these, like, other images within the poem itself, right? Like the fact that it's layered in this idea metaphor of a party, but then like the image of, like, the dogs could be cops, could be like, there's all this layered language
Sure.
in there that keeps tripping you up because it's such a surreal understanding that it's supposed to be mourning because someone's passed away, but then that person who's passed away shows up.
Right.
But then you get all these other elements of what life is like, right? Like that they were a meth head, that people showed up because he cooked the stuff. Like the fact that the mom was like asleep for 10 years, ignorant, maybe of what was going on in this particular time frame. Um, like all the evidence of things, the way you think of both like life happens after a certain period, but then at the same, the same like whirlwind of what happens when you have a massive house party, right? Like it's
Right.
just all left
I mean,
to
every room is different, and
right,
it's just
right.
kind of, yeah, almost a carousel kind of,
Of
yeah,
all these things, right? Like
yeah.
what's the aftermath of a party? Like, and then you see all, you see films of like, I don't know, like what's that old movie that Tom Hanks was in that he's got COVID, right? Was it Bachelor Party? Like
Oh my goodness, I remember that was one
I
of his
keep,
first
like
movies.
that's actually
Yeah,
like so when I was
right,
reading this
right.
poem, like I
Yeah.
keep thinking of that film. I keep thinking of like what's that other movie that just came out that like a lot of the kids now are watching? I think it's called like Project X, and it's like just massive moments of like crazy partying, but like the surreal element is like what were all the individual things happening at the
Yep.
moment that stuff was happening, and that's the way a party goes. Like sometimes people walk away from a party devastated by certain things, but for in this particular instance the speaker is imagining like what all this is because there's a mourning, there's quietly a thing that's being put away, and then
Well,
maybe at the same time
but,
a breath taken to celebrate
yeah.
that they're having to make that shift for themselves.
Well, there's also something kind of, is eulogistic a word? I mean, just
Yeah,
kind of like, totally remembering this brother. Like
right.
all these things are almost like symbolically, there's symbolic reminders of the brother's life, and
Right.
what life was like with him,
Right.
or the effect.
And
Yeah.
so I think that's what sits with me when I read this poem. And like I can read it over and over and different parts pop up in different ways. So it's a good piece.
When um are there times in life when the poem are there times in life that call the poem up for you? I mean, are you aware of?
I was funny part was Jasmine had just posted about it today. So we gave our daughter Luz Maria, who's about to turn 2 in May.
I should say,
Um,
Jasmine, your amazing poet partner,
that
wife,
Jasmine Mendez is a poet and a
Jasmine.
writer and
Yeah,
does all her stuff. And I think she'll be doing this stuff as well. So it's very
I'm
good to
looking
see
forward to it. Yes.
her. And so we gave Luz Maria loteria cards,
Right.
and she was thumbing through the cards and like the deck of the actual like what you call out, and she had picked up one card and looked at it, and she was like "Dada," and in reference to me, and Jasmine kind of giggled when she looked at the card, and it was the
Oh,
picture of El Borracho,
right. The
and
drunkard. Right.
so like I didn't say anything at the moment, but like a part of me just kind of like it was kind of heartfelt because it was like, oh crap. And it very much felt like, past demons coming to haunt because growing up as a kid playing Loteria, my dad was a big drunk. And
Mhm.
so family members would joke. And instead of calling El Borracho, they would be like, Tio Pedro.
Uh,
Or
right. Right.
friends who would play Loteria with me be like, oh, El Señor Mendez. And then,
Right.
so like that, like, I very much have tried for a large part of my life to not be the way he was with certain things, and especially now that I have a kid, wanting to be to try to do things in a different way than how my old man did them.
Mhm.
And so I've always wondered in the back of my head, will I end up being, this addicted individual similar to when my dad is, and what it takes to break that cycle, right? And so I've
Right.
tried really hard to make sure that those things aren't a part of my life. And then but in like an innocent moment, like that thing that my daughter doesn't know what that means, does it hit like a ton of bricks, right? And so I was reading the poem earlier and I was like, man, like how much of me is in this, and then it reminded me of the speaker, how much of the speaker is involved in the way of this preparation, this stuff. So I think that kind of it,
Mm.
when that moment happened, I thought about a couple of the lines of the poem.
Yeah. Mm.
So yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that.
Yay.
You got anything you want to plug?
Right now, if anybody's interested, you can go to tinteroprojects.com. We're trying to switch things up. We're working to try to figure out a way to help folks that were supposed to have book launches this spring and summer, to see if we can retool that and put that together for them. And then we can go from there. So you can go to tinteroprojects.com or catch us on Twitter at Tintero Project. We couldn't cover the S. And then we'll see you guys out in the virtual block.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Cool.
thanks, Lupe. It's
Thank
very
you,
cool.
sir.
Good to see you.
All right. We'll talk soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
I'd like to again thank Lupe Mendez for sharing that poem by Natalie Diaz, No More Cake Here, and for the great conversation and for continuing to do the great work he's doing in Houston, in Texas. Well, that about wraps it up. I got one suggestion after the first episode, and that was that I consider closing every episode with the poem that inspired this podcast title. Fish for Fallen Light is from the closing line by one of the last poems written by the great poet from Chile, Pablo Neruda, translated by William O'Daly, and put out by Copper Canyon Press. It's a poem that has lived with me for many decades, and it's just an important poem for me. So it's entitled, here it goes. If each day falls inside each night, there exists a well where clarity lies imprisoned. We must sit at the rim of the well of darkness and fish for fallen light with patience. Still good advice. Thanks for joining us. I'll try to get another episode up as soon as possible. Until then, please share this if you enjoyed it. Give it a like and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. I'm told that helps somehow to get the word out. And ditto on Facebook. Share it wherever you'd like. And leave a comment if you'd like. Guess that's about it. Keep fishing. Bye.